Okay.
For the
That
record,
was a quick meeting.
So, good evening. Let's call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is the minutes from both January 16th and January 23. So January 16th, is there a motion?
Move the approval of the minutes of January 16th, 2024, with any
Subject to-
necessary corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2.
under number 6, where it says the project that includes some affordable units, I would appreciate it if we put either a percent or a number in there, because that was really the reason, kind of the basis for approving this, in my opinion.
Okay. Anything else on page 2? Page 3. Hearing no other corrections, all those in favor of approving the minutes with the modification by Jean, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those
Aye.
opposed? The ayes have it. January 23, is there a motion?
Move the approval of the minutes of January 23, 2024, with amendments, corrections.
Is there a second?
Second?
Page 1.
So all of the motions that are listed on the minutes don't have any action associated with them.
Well, that's my fault.
So we need to have that a vote was held and the number and how they came out on 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Make that change.
The thing I wasn't quite sure of is there was one, we had the old brick church bond was, as presented, it was the wrong number, right? And we corrected that?
That was corrected, yeah.
So one of these should say as corrected, I think.
Anything else on page, you got that?
Yep.
Anything else on page 1? Page 2. Hearing no further modifications, all those in favor of approving the minutes with the modifications as presented, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Great. Housekeeping item is completed. Next, public comment. This is a moment for anybody to speak in their mind to the board. It could be what things that are on the agenda, but it doesn't have to be. I don't see anybody in the room that is a likely candidate for public comment, but I don't want to, if people are feeling particularly commenty, they can come forward. Is there anybody online?
I don't see anyone in the chat or other hand raised.
Okay. So next on the agenda, tax increment financing, TIF District Panel discussions. We have honored guests. If you folks could come up. Charlie Baker, Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Ted Brady, Executive Director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And Ilana Blanchard, Community Development Director for the City of South Burlington. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Eric for a brief introduction and presentation, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Ted, and thanks everyone for joining us this evening on this topic. Our guests are very busy people with a lot of new meetings. I really appreciate their time this evening for a bit of discussion. So this just kind of bring us back to where we are with this discussion. There's an ARPA project proposal to consider allocating funds to study the viability of a tax increment financing district, or a TIF district, and also to assist in preparing an application should the town would apply for the district as part of the proposal. Question before the select board is whether to allocate those funds to study a possible TIF with the consultant. The question right now is not whether to apply for a TIF at this time. It would be the first would do the analysis and then could consider applying after the analysis. And the board plans to have an ARPA work session at its next meeting, so lining up the panel discussions, preceding that ARPA discussion coming up. Should the town apply and a TIF district's approved, it would then allow the town to take an active role in the future development pattern of the growth center by identifying priority infrastructure projects to utilize TIF funds. And it's not about accelerating growth, it's about good public facility planning to support the growth, meeting the town's goals. The town would have its hand on the controls in the growth center much more than it does today. As a reminder, the town could leverage education taxes, upwards of 70%, to fund infrastructure over the life of the district. And overall, this is complicated governance work, and it requires comprehensive examination with ongoing modeling and monitoring. It's an opportunity for the town it may not see again. So it's certainly a thought of the board. I'll turn over our plan director, Matt Belanger, just for a couple initial comments, and then turn over to our panel to share their insight and their experiences with it.
Thanks, Eric. And I'd like to share in thanking our guests to come tonight and talk about their perspectives and experiences with this important tool in the toolbox available to Vermont communities. So in talking about what are some potential goals for the use of the tax increment finance tool for Williston and particularly in Taft Corner. So one potential goal would be to use investment in public infrastructure to focus development within the growth center, not just in the growth center, but into some sub-center areas within the growth center. Williston's growth center is over 800 acres in size. It's large. One of the things that our consultant team identified in the process that led up to the adoption of our form-based code was that there would be some challenges for Williston in having new development happen near enough to other new development that you would start to get a center of gravity that would feel like a town center. The quote from the vision plan was, 4 buildings, one on each corner of an intersection, could be the beginning of a town center, but 20 buildings spread out across the entire growth center might not come together and really feel like a place the same way that the town's expressed goals talk about. So when the town chooses to invest in infrastructure in a particular location, it is doing something that might direct growth into one of those more central locations. Another reason to consider this tool is to help the town in its plans to maintain and enhance economic resilience in the growth center. As you most probably all recall from the form-based code conversation, the growth center contains some older development and development that's based on some kinds of land use that we're not so sure are going to be around forever, namely big box stores and large shopping centers. So by having the ability to intervene when needed and invest in infrastructure that focuses growth, the town can also put some control into how those legacy areas begin to change, evolve, or become part of that center within the growth center. Another possibility is that areas within the growth center that might be kind of stuck, that might not evolve because they have infrastructure needs that development on that one property itself isn't worth it to make the street upgrade or to make the stormwater upgrade. The town can come in and invest in infrastructure in ways that there might be a property that its redevelopment is really critical to the town's vision, but it needs some infrastructure to make that happen, and it's in the town's interest to come in and do that. So a way of coordinating infrastructure planning and construction. Another use of this tool, and again, just the idea of targeted investment, is to create neighborhoods within the growth center that future community facilities could be a part of. As the town looks into its long range and talks about things like public parks or a community center or a policing facility, if those are to be located in the growth center, the town can invest in infrastructure in the areas where it thinks those are suitable to bring sort of a neighborhood along with them. So you think about those facilities as not being isolated out on their own on a property that the town's advancing on, but being part of a growing, changing neighborhood that helps support that facility and make it part of the fabric of the area. And finally, infrastructure investment in the growth center via this tool can encourage compact development and the creation of affordable housing. So the growth center is the place in the town where the town is most likely to succeed in its housing goals because of the compactness of what can be allowed there. infrastructure investment can allow that to happen. And I'm going to stop there. I think there's a theme through all of those points, which is that the town invests in infrastructure using this tool, and it chooses where to do so. And by choosing where to do so, it can choose where things are likely to happen first, and what sequence things are likely to happen in. And because of the size of our growth center and the dispersion of what's there, taking some control or having some influence over that can really help the town achieve its goals. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so we'll have from the board hear from Ted and Charlie, and then we'll have more of a case study from Alana from South Burlington, who's been overseeing their. Ted and Charlie.
Thanks, Eric. Nice to see everybody. Ted Brady from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Just a quick reminder for those following along at home, and in case Ted Kenny's been here so long he forgot what we are. The league is your league. We're member-owned. All 247 cities and towns are members of the league. We exist to serve you. We do so by providing education to municipal officials. We do so by offering trainings, one-on-one legal assistance. So any of you can call us at any time and ask any question you want. Sometimes we can answer them, sometimes we can't. I didn't say we're going to answer every question, but you can ask any question. We provide you your insurance through Passive, so thanks for being a member of Passive, and workers' comp through Verb. And I really want to thank you for lending us Eric, who serves on our trust board. And so thanks for being a healthy member that's trying to influence how we govern ourselves so that we can provide you the best service. The other thing the league does is we advocate for you. And the last 5 to 10 years, even before my time, I've been there for 3 years. One of the big things we've had to advocate for is community and economic development tools for Vermont municipalities. Because our members told us to, but also because there really aren't that many resources from the state or from the feds that are directed to helping municipalities invest in themselves and provide ways to make their communities more engaging and vital and healthy, and creating economic opportunities for Vermonters. And so one of the things that we've been advocating for really heavily has been the tax increment financing program. You may know or may not know, it's been kind of controversial around the state because of our statewide education fund. And the fact that a town's action does impact a statewide revenue source. Turns out the people in Montpelier follow that kind of thing really closely. But as Matt has just said, the tax increment financing tool gives communities a way to make something happen that would not otherwise happen. And that's what this should be used for. And what Matt just described was a really good summary of what you're trying to make happen differently, right? Growth is going to happen in the town of Williston, right? It's obviously an economic growth engine for the state. This tool allows you to make growth happen in a very specific way, in a way that benefits the community, in a way that puts development where you want it, how you want it to look, and is there a place-based economic development strategy, right? One that says we are going to build in this place because it's what our community has decided where we want to build. We're going to say yes here, we're going to say no in other places through an incentive, which is a huge incentive, which is building infrastructure and making a big investment in infrastructure. There is no other tool out there that is this effective. I can tell you that because we studied it. The league did a study on TIF about 2 years ago, hired an economist out of University of Wisconsin, and the findings from that study showed that TIF raised municipal tax revenue over the life of the project. It raised ed fund revenue over the life of a project. It incentivized a lot of other state and federal money. And I hope that's, what Williston is thinking. If you do a TIF, it's not like you just use the TIF and you've built infrastructure. That TIF, state money and federal money follows that TIF because you create an environment where it's a sucking sound from all those federal and state resources. They see something happening and there's a place to put money, and perhaps most importantly, there's an enormous match, right, that we have a hard time coming up with as municipalities. And we also found that the tax increment financing program in Vermont was the strictest in the country. So you know that you're coming into a program that around the country, some TIFs can be used to do things like build baseball stadiums. That's not happening in Vermont. The TIF program is used to build municipal infrastructure only in certain places, growth centers, designated places, and it needs to, meet certain criteria for housing, blight, transportation. There's only certain things you can use money for. So use the money for. So it's really it's the most effective tool in an economic developer's toolbox to make things happen, purposeful things happen in your community. I want to end my just comments with saying, also go in eyes wide open, right? The 12 communities that are in the tax increment financing program now, maybe it's 11, the number, it's been a couple years since I was at the Agency of Commerce. There's a lot of scrutiny, right? You'll all become very good friends with Doug Hoffer, with our auditor. You'll all become very good friends with VEPSI, the Vermont Economic Progress Council that oversees this program. And you should go in with, a sturdy stomach to say, we know what we're getting into, and the benefit of this program for our community is worth, what will likely be a 20-year relationship as you pay off the bonds. So so in summary, just a quick reminder, this is something the League has been supporting communities have access to for years. It's something we're fighting the legislature every year over to make sure that it still exists. The program is, I want to just reiterate this, it's a purposeful program, a place-based program to make something happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. You're going to have to prove that, right? That but for. If you did not use this tool, this development wouldn't happen either where it's happening or the way it's happening. And then finally, just a quick reminder, did I say this already? It's a long-term relationship. You're getting married. So happy to answer any questions after you hear the rest of this, but excited that Williston's thinking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Charlie Baker from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Thanks for being here, or thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you tonight. And I think those were really helpful, and I do want to follow up on Matt's comments about kind of implementing your plan. We invested heavily in your form-based code work and the kind of the plan that accompanies that, and just to emphasize that, like implementing your plan, and this is one of the really rare tools that you have to kind of leverage those future tax dollars. And I assume, maybe I shouldn't assume, but the tax increment is the new property tax associated with the property. So that new revenue is what is paying off the money here. You can use 70% of the education fund tax rate, and then the other 30% is on the municipal tax rate. So, but it's only for that increment. So I think it's kind of a hard concept to realize that the base property taxes are still flowing just as they normally do to the ed fund, to the municipality. But when new real estate investment happens on the property and it has an increase in value, that increase in tax revenue is what helps pay you're really borrowing, right? You're doing a bond to do an infrastructure investment for 20 years. These have 20-year lives. And just to kind of go back on some of the history, these go back to the late 90s. I just pulled this off the TIF website, but just to give you a little sense, Newport actually was the first one in like 97, or maybe Burlington Waterfront. Burlington Waterfront's a little different. They've been continuing to do theirs, but Burlington has 2 TIFs. Winooski is, I think, going to pay theirs off in a month or within the next 60 days. I think if you look at towns like Winooski and St. Albans, you can really see how their downtown cores evolved. There's really no comparison to what it was before and then after they invested and kind of did this front end investment to leverage private investment that follows, right? And that's really what you're doing. It's what both Matt and Ted were referring to. And I'm sure Alana will get into more detail. And you can, again, taken from the website, you can actually obtain land, you can prepare sites, you can do the infrastructure, which has been the most common one, I think, sewer, water, roads. you might have a road that might be an opportunity here. And so, and then also, you can join in public-private partnerships, and then it can also pay for the TIF financial management, because you are going to have some consultants that you're going to need to engage to be in that marriage with the auditors and VEPSI along the way. And I think you're in a very good place from my perspective. You're part of the process is formulating a plan. What would you do? I think you got probably the beginnings of that. I'm sure you need to do some more detailed work, as Matt was referencing, about timing and sequencing, and what kind of investment do you want to make in what place to encourage what kind of reaction from the property owners, which I'm sure will be a lot of conversation with the property owners. And you have a lot of acreage here, but also a lot of opportunity to really achieve the vision that you've all been working on in the last few years. So we'll leave it at that, and we're happy to help support whichever way we can. But thanks for the time. Wow.
Okay, good evening. My name's Alana Blanchard. My name actually, Alana, rhymes with iguana, if you have trouble. I have a soft voice, so I'm going to work on projecting, but wave your hands if you can't hear what I'm saying. So I'm going to try to project. Do I project through the Zoom?
Oh, yeah. I saw, I just looked to make you a panelist.
Okay.
And then that should let you show.
Great. So just give me a moment. Join as panelist. The scary thing about this is that you always hope your microphone is off because it sounds awful when, okay, great. Here we go. Okay, so, no. There we go. So hopefully this presentation will echo what Charlie has said, and also what, goodness. Ted has said.
There's two of
Thank
us. You can say Ted, you'll get it right.
No,
Get a better
I'm
chance.
terrible with names, and I've known you a long time, so that's horrible. And he,
That's okay, iguana.
yeah.
Oh, I mean,
VLCT is an amazing resource. Obviously, we lean on you guys all the time. So, South Burlington TIF District has been around now since 2012, but it's been an idea in our community. I think a downtown has been an idea in our community since the 70s, and certainly at least in the 2000s, we were already thinking about establishing a TIF district. And I was specifically hired to help this get started. That was like one of my first goals, was I had to submit a TIF district application. We came in one of the versions of the TIF districts. There's lots of flavors of them because the legislature keeps tinkering with them. And hopefully with VLCT's help, they will continue to do so and make it an easier process. So for South Burlington, we had a very specific goals in mind. We have been one of the poster children for sprawl in Vermont. And as you see other people go through form-based codes process, people are like, oh, we don't want to be like South Burlington. I don't think they can say that anymore. So for us, it's been an incredible tool for getting new community resources. So parks, the library, and City Hall, supporting downtown development. So we really, one of the hallmarks of sprawl is spread out housing, and we wanted a walkable downtown, and we wanted compact development, affordable housing, but a space that felt like a community center, and we wanted the development pattern that would support that. And we also had worked with CCRPC. We had a huge grant from you following on the EPOS grant to develop a form-based code similarly. And so that grant came in around the same time that the TIF district plan was being developed. And so they really worked together to think about what the downtown should be and reinforced each other. And then just creating places that welcome people. In South Burlington, our town hall wasn't super welcoming, not to say terrible things about it, but it wasn't as charming as yours is by any means. And we had big open, great parks and great open spaces, but there wasn't a place that you could point to and be like, that's really the heart of the community. And so with City Center coming to fruition, it's become a space that people can point to and say, that's our downtown. So it is incredibly, one of the hallmarks of the program is the longevity of it and the commitment that it requires a community to make. So you develop a plan. It's different from a comprehensive plan in that you're pouring so much money and staff time into it. And you are putting a lot of money into a comp plan also, but you're making so many commitments. The voters are voting on so many things. And then you have to make, maybe once, but maybe several times, you'll have to make a decision about going out to debt and, be looking at, will we have the revenue to support that? If we don't have the revenue, how are we going to make it up? And are these investments going to be worth it and get us what we want as a community? And so for the city of South Burlington, and I'll show you later on, we did layer many things, but one of the things that happens with that really long timeline is that it becomes an organizing principle for your funding, for your planning, for many program investments, and pulls everything together. And I hate to use the word lock-in because it's given the community and our political leaders, as well as our staff, a lot of stability and consistency in the direction of the city on, at least in this one area. And this is the one area where all of our council will go out and campaign together, and bring the same message and work together on bond votes, and to communicate to people clearly what the TIF district is and what it does for the city. And you can see that was the view outside of City Hall over the past year, and it's completely different now. I can't even see the building anymore. So it's been the most recent investment. I know you guys have that kind of investment all the time, but it's been a very big deal for us. So we have 3 state designations, of which the TIF district is one. We have a new town center. We also have a neighborhood, and all of these are different tools in the toolbox. So the TIF district is the biggest and main economic development tool in the state, but there are so many others, and you need all of them to ensure that you get that shift in development and that creation of, depending on what your goals are. For us, we needed every single one of them. Maybe other communities are just making smaller adjustments, but for us, we were going from mid-scale housing, very suburban style, and strip malls, and we really needed to go in a different direction, according to our comprehensive plans, and so we needed all of this to get there. We have 4 federal and state grants. We're still applying for grants, and in the application process, you have to talk a lot about your planning. And it's been kind of fun for me because I'm talking about we planned the form-based code, and we planned the streets, and we planned this, and these are all working together. And so here I am, 10 years later or 8 years later, talking about all of the different partnerships that got us to where we are and will move us forward. The public has voted on this multiple times. There's been a lot of support, and a lot of that is because of the leadership of the town, of the city. So our city has been very supportive of the program, even when maybe one of the projects was a 3-2 vote at the end when they go out to bond. They're very supportive of the overall program, and so that has been huge. We're actually on our 2nd comprehensive plan, and it still talks about city center and moving that project forward, which is good because we have a long way to go. And then we have had many unified work program, UPWP, I always forget what the second, Unified Planning Work Program. That's it? Yep, okay, there. So, and we use our own funds. So part of our building, all of our projects, of all of our projects that are TIF district financed, some of them are inside the TIF district, some of them are outside but contribute to the TIF district. And 3 of them are only partially funded with TIF district financing. So that's where we're bringing in federal funds. And then sometimes just in order to ensure cash flow, we've used impact fees for our building. We use clerk funds that they set aside for information storage in order to help build the vault. So lots of different funds come into projects. So this is where we are. And, you know, we're about to do a bond for 18 million. We'll have about 29 million total debt at the end of March. And we're at the moment, you know, we're bringing in, last year we brought in the 450,000 of tax increment financing. This year we'll bring in 650, and then over time it will grow to about 3 million a year. So that we're not all the way there yet. So we're still about 6 million short of what we'll need to pay off all of the debt. And that's something that's a risk that we are all taking. That's our particular TIF. So our TIF district is based on building the projects and then working to develop the partnerships to get that development done. Not all TIF districts are like that. But because of the benefits that we see with the TIF district and all the other money, all the TIF increment that we will be able to collect, it still makes sense to go forward with completing our investments in order to create the town tower. So this is where we are today. Also, we've added 43 million to our tax base since 2012. So that is what the increment is assessed against. And our TIF, like I said, all TIFs are different flavors. So we're at a 75-25 split. So we keep 75% of the taxes on that increment every year. And then everything that's added to that so everything that is currently under construction and then will be completed by 2026, that will build that up. And then we'll be continuing to encourage development within the TIF district in order to hit our target of revenue to pay off all of the bonds. We have a lot of affordable housing. One thing that has happened through some of the incentives that are set up by the state for permitting is that a lot of our affordable housing was front loaded, but we also have inclusive zoning, inclusive zoning. Inclusionary zoning. Thank you. I feel like there's something wrong there. Inclusionary.
It is inclusive.
It is inclusive, but it's inclusionary. It requires a certain number of affordable housing units. It's different from the states, so the developers have to meet both of those. And I'll just move through these. We have parks. We have public EV chargers. That's also a state grant. So we have lots of different new amenities for the public, and we are growing as a TIF district. We have 9 projects that have been voted on, so 9 projects that we'll be completing. 5 of them are still incomplete, so we're still building, and then we've completed 3 of those projects if we count, as long as we count our library, city hall, and senior center as one project.
You say nine voted? What is that?
So that means that of the 9 projects, so we actually started out with more projects in our TIF district plan. We've amended it 2 or 3 times. And the last time that we amended it, we took out some projects. So we started with a big tent, and then we said, you know, to be realistic, we're going to build less projects. So we are committed to building 9 projects. Those have all been voted on by the public. And of those 9 projects, 3 of them, Market Street, City Center Park, and 180 Market Street, which is our new library, our city hall, and our senior center, are complete.
Voted by way of a bond vote?
Yes, by a bond vote. Okay. Yes. So it goes. there's actually a special process for each debt issue. And the auditor pays a lot of attention to this, just so you know. So you have extra hearings and extra discussion that goes into the bond vote than a regular municipal bond. It gets extra scrutiny, and you do extra documentation for the public and a lot of education for the public about what that bond issue will be. And then we've had ours in November, like in presidential elections, and then also during town meeting. So we have avoided August elections, but you could. And a lot of that is we just want to make sure that people can know that there was a lot of public input into whether or not that bond went forward. So we have put several projects into each bond vote. And that's why those numbers are different. Sorry. So there were actually four bond votes, but 9 projects.
Sorry, should be fine. Okay. So the first projects completed were really public projects, not something a developer is doing where you're going to be able to get feedback, etc. So how are you paying the related debt if you're not really taking in any new source of revenue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, our TIF district is different from other TIF districts. So some TIF districts have a specific development. Killington's a great example where they have, I believe it's a ski resort, is going to expand and add tax capacity, and they're building infrastructure, public infrastructure specifically to service this, and it will sort of tie out. In our case, we initially brought in a lot of federal funds. So for Market Street, we brought in a lot of federal funds, and we also brought in impact fees. And then we knew there was some development that was already occurring, and then we knew there was permitting occurring. And so we looked at those numbers and we said, okay, that's why we had so many votes. We're like, okay, we know we can pretty much cover this much. This is how much risk we have in doing this. The timing wasn't exactly what we predicted, but it wasn't too far off, if that makes sense. So,
Yes. Was there a philosophy of like doing the park and the town or the city hall in that zone was going to provide, and the library was going to provide benefits for those other private property owners?
We focused on projects that we knew would benefit the community and also create the context for a much more elevated and much more intensive and expensive type of development, being mixed use or downtown, which we know is much riskier. So we wanted to create that special environment that can support that extra level of investment by the private sector. And in some cases, the private sector has gone and built some of our projects. So part of Garden Street is actually being built by the private sector. The other thing that we're doing, and this is sort of inside baseball for you, is that we are accounting on a 20-year timeline. So all of the TIF is in a TIF fund, and so it's not on an annual budget. It's in a special fund, which allows us to carry costs. So when we have a surplus, we carry that into the next year. When we have a deficit, we don't say deficit, but when we have less money in it than we have coming in, we carry that and say, we know that we have enough cash on hand. We also have a reserve fund. And so the reserve fund helps us to know that we are not going to fiscally as a city get into trouble because we have another special fund over here where we're putting in funds that will pay for the city costs as part of the TIF district.
Thank you.
And so we've built that up, and that sort of evens everything out. That makes sense. And we're also using that to look to say this is what happens if we have the whole. So that reserve fund helps at that at that end too. So these are the projects that are done: Market Street, City Center Park, the library, the City Hall, and the Senior Center. City Center Park, we have a phase 2, so that's one of the 9 projects. Garden Street, if you all know Al's French Fries, I hope. And so the intersection with Al's French Fries, what used to be the travel agency, right on the corner of Midas, White Street, and Williston Road, that is one of our big projects, is to fix that. So that's one of the ones that's been voted on. That road will connect all the way through to Trader Joe's, between Trader Joe's and Healthy Living. And so we'll probably start the section between Healthy Living and Trader Joe's this year. The rest of it will probably, it's going to be a big project. And I apologize, because if you want to go to Burlington, you might have to do some detours when this happens. But it will be really exciting, because at the moment, this is where we're really going from strip commercial center to a walkable downtown. That intersection has crosswalks that go east-west, but they don't go north-south. This project will also bring a shared use path onto Williston Road, going east, and really change the overall character of that intersection. So it sets the stage for amazing things to happen down the road on all of those corners. Williston Road streetscape will add a shared use path. City Center Park connection is bringing City Center Park to the community, and then the east-west crossing is a ped bike bridge over I-89. And so you can see here, I have them coming out one by one. So east-west crossing will allow people to get over the interstate on completely separated from the exit 14 intersection. Williston Road streetscape allows people to bike and walk on Williston Road. And then Garden Street continues over to the intersection with Heidelberg Road. And that really begins to create a regional connection along US Route 2 for more than cars. And for us, this has been huge, because this area has been identified year after year in plans that as a big problem for walkers and especially bikers. So those are, oops, there's one more. City Center Park connection. So, and I think you're very excited about this one.
Just see my house. And I will be able to walk on that connection to help.
So all of these projects are more than we would normally do as a city, if we were just going out and building it with, I hate to say this, with taxpayer money, but we're not, except for the reserve fund, which is taxpayer funded. Everything here, we're bringing in grants, we're using impact fees, and we're using tax increment financing, and putting all of those together enables us to say, when we make this connection to the park, we want it to be plowable in the winter. So we're going to build a boardwalk that we can run our plows over. When we build these bike paths, we want it to be, really easy for wheelchairs. And so we've been trying a lot of new things here that we had never done before as a city. So it's been a big change for our residents. And we'd love to see you. Please come and visit. And, always happy to answer questions. I didn't put up my email, but it's pretty straightforward, and I'm right on the website. We are doing Illuminate Vermont again this year on Market Street, and you can check out all the construction. It'll be the weekend before the eclipse, so the Friday and Saturday. We're expecting downtown will be very crowded, so we've invited a lot of food trucks.
Questions from the board?
My wife and I, early this winter, went over to the marketplace just to see what it looked like. We went to the library. It was a beautiful library, the senior center off it. We were really impressed. We like the design of it. Do you have a height restriction on the buildings over there?
6 stories.
6 stories?
And there may also be a height restriction, only no one has built a 6-story building. We have a 5-story building under construction, but
I remember several years ago, the athletic director from UVM was talking about a sports complex over in that area. Whatever happened to that? Is that still on the board or?
no, I think they decided to invest in a arena on their property. So they're building, they're in the process, I believe, of either fundraising or actually building. So it'll be across the street from us.
Across the interstate.
Interstate, yeah.
We can walk there.
So once the TIF district is passed, until the value increases, you know, and you get impact, you need to grow at a specific rate to pay back the bond, correct?
That's
I know
right.
you talked about reserve funds and impact fees.
That's correct. So the current property that has been permitted for development will get us all the way through the payments according to our models. So we have one bit of money that is going out to be issued in March. So that the last, so we have that $6 million estimated gap. And so all the development that is currently permitted or underway will cover everything up to there. So the stuff that comes earlier is actually worth a lot more because you collect for more years. But the stuff that the later and later it comes, the less money, the less revenue it brings, because in terms of paying for the TIF district bonds, because you're just collecting less years. So our estimate is that we would need, in order to get that last 6 million of revenue, we would need to build at today's current value of buildings. Now that changes over time, where we expect to go through a reassessment soon, would be 61 units per year between 2027 and 2036. So opening every year for 10 years. So an additional 61 units. And so that's something that we'll be working on. We'll be working with property owners and developers in order to continue to promote the TIF district as a place to develop.
And that would be all private investments.
Correct.
South Burlington puts up 60 units every weekend, so it shouldn't really be a problem.
We average 140
A year.
a year.
Oh,
So, and we have, I mean, if we look at our recent years, the majority of the development is occurring in city center, which is what was planned for.
the city center, I think of it as being defined between Heinsberg Road and Dorset Street. Is that correct? Or does it extend further east?
That is our TIF district, and the form-based code includes the Staples Plaza and then the Holiday Inn to the north
And U-Mall.
and the U-Mall.
The U-Mall.
So I'm curious about the, maybe this is for, probably not for you, Alana, but I was reading about, so this incremental value, right? And one of the reports I was reading that we got last couple weeks ago, maybe the auditor realized that you can't just say the value is going to be flat and anything above that goes, it counts towards the revenue that we would get the benefit of. But they are going to say, well, there would be some increase in the value of that property and you only get what's above that. Am I expressing this correctly? They're not saying that if this piece of land is worth $1 million today, it's always going to be worth $1 million, and anything above that gets counted towards your additional valuation.
That's
They're
correct.
saying that $1 million over 20 years is going to go up in some increment. And so you might only be getting, if it goes from 1 to 2 over 10 years, you might only get the value of 800K or something.
So I'm not as up on the most recent proposals, but I believe that the way the TIF still works and the way that it works for us is that, I'll just tell you the way it works for us, and we'll just assume that's the way it still works. So 2012, which is when we started our TIF district, Once you vote on it, April 1 of that year becomes your start date. And that's your original taxable value. That is the value of your TIF district, your baseline for the life of the TIF district. So for us, until 2037, that's going to be our zero. And then all the value above that, whether we do an assessment or, however we do it, because what happens when you do an assessment is then you readjust your tax rate. So you could end up with less money or more money. You don't know until you have that new tax rate. In our case, the last time our TIF district was actually we believe it increased in value faster than the rest of the city because we ended up with more money when we did the reassessment. Because a reassessment has to be revenue neutral. So,
Right.
So
Well, we should probably check on that, because I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I read that in the auditor's thing that you sent around, that they would, I don't know if they would look at how much other properties this is just important to me. If they look at the other properties in the town and they said, well, your TIF district would go up the same amount as 10% as your village district, that doesn't make any sense, but whatever they picked. But if they also said, like, we know that Taft's Corners you'd have more hotels on that land. You just have prettier roads with their hotels on that land. So, that would make the headroom much smaller. So that would be really important for me to know.
And that's what's before the legislature now.
no, I don't think it's,
I don't know why it's in Doug Hopper's letter then, so.
The auditor has a lot of wishes for what the tax increment financing district would do differently.
Yeah,
And some of them.
picked up on that.
Yeah, and that might be one of the proposals in his report, but I don't believe that change has happened or that it's actually being considered this year.
Okay.
I haven't seen
But
that.
we're a couple of years out, so that would be just a huge thing if it really cut the headroom back quite a bit.
yeah, I think it would make it very difficult to predict.
Well,
Well, we could just compare it to South Burlington and say, well, South Burlington's property without a TIF district went up 8%, so we would assume that Taft's Corners would go up 8%, and if you went up 12%, you get 4. Right?
Wouldn't
So-
it be a massive, almost a disincentive if that happened? I mean, he's saying, look, if the property that was before the TIF district was worth $1 million, and then after the TIF work is done, it's now worth $4 million. But my magic 8-ball tells me that it was going to be $3 million anyway, so I'm going to subtract those two, and you only get the benefit of the amount that of that difference, not the amount of the difference from the what I'd call the basis up.
That
what
seems
would be
fundamentally unfair.
what would the point of a TIF district be?
Yeah.
I mean, I think in most cases, you're talking about the value of a brownfield or something, which probably wouldn't change dramatically, right? Versus a pretty impressively fast-growing property that we just want to grow differently.
Yeah.
That's my concern. Okay. we've
Well,
got my
but
other
then the
question-
value of the neighboring properties would also increase as you built projects. So I can't imagine a world in which that would work because if the first development you have within your TIF district, the neighboring property to that development is going to be worth more because of the project, and then
Yes,
so
but
on
they
and
could
so
compare
forth.
it to Five Corners in Essex, right? I mean, I'm not sure how he would do it. I'm just saying that was spelled out pretty clearly that they thought that was something that would happen. So the other question I have is, maybe this is for you, Matt, but I think this is Ted's executive write-up. The assessment of state Vermont TIF policy, is that yours? It says that the new legislation is focused on affordable housing, brownfield remediation, and transportation enhancement. So we don't have that many brownfields, do we, in Taft's Corners?
No, we have what I would call gray fields, which is my word for parking lots. So we don't have brownfields in Taft Corners, but we do have areas that are challenging to develop or redevelop, either because they were partially developed before or they were left behind when, like a big box pad was created, something like that.
Yeah.
We certainly have opportunity for transportation enhancements. All of those streets we put on the map for the official map that underlies the form-based code, those are all about mobility. I forget what the third one was.
Affordable housing, brownfields, and transportation. I mean, I don't mind if we want to go forward with this because just as an affordable housing issue, but that should be not hidden somewhere. That should be one reason that we're doing it. I guess I'm just I'm a bit of a skeptic on this because yes, if we were building a library and a senior center and a new town hall, maybe not a new town hall, but if we were a senior center, a community center and a new library and all that we were getting out of it, even great walking paths and all that, I think maybe it would be more interesting, but to tell taxpayers we're taking this risk so that we can put the road here instead of here is a much harder sell. So I'm a bit of a skeptic, that's all I'm going to say.
I think it's good to be a skeptic on this. And I think that the question before the select board right now is whether to allocate some funds to study this or not. And the scope of that study, as I understand it, is number one, to develop, refine, and prioritize that project list and talk about, is this all about streets and roads and pipes and things that aren't very exciting? Does it include other components like a piece of a community center or a park or other enhancements? And then to also look at what is the actual likelihood that all of this would be viable. So Ilana did a great job talking about the risk assessment that South Burlington went through. Is our grand list really going to go up enough to fund the construction of the things that we need to build to make it happen? We did a lot of really great planning and dreaming and visioning around Tap Corners from 2019 till 2022. And we did put some things on the map and start thinking about physically the way it would all fit. But we definitely didn't go into the level of detail that a TIF study would take us, which would be, what are the projects that are necessary? What are the projects that are desirable? What are they going to cost? Are they likely to generate the type of development that meets the town's vision and also allows the town to pay for the infrastructure that's needed? So to me, being skeptical is what this stage is all about. And there are, from my perspective, and I think Eric's, no foregone conclusions that this is definitely the right tool for Williston or for Tap Corners or right now. What we do know is there's a limited window of opportunity to consider it. And we know that it's probably the most powerful tool that any Vermont communities have been able to employ to do this kind of work.
Yeah, but what we're asking next week is to take $70,000 that we could and put to some other use in the town in order to ask some really basic questions. So that's, I wish we were I wish there was an increment between 0 and 40 and 70 to look at this a little bit harder.
So it's phased in two parts. So the initial 35,000 from the consultant's estimate would be to do that analysis, and then the additional 35,000 would be to apply for the district. So it could be a decision for that, regardless if the town applied for a TIF district or not. It's good planning exercise. It's taking the town to have a more active role in forecasting the future for Tap Corners, that what the town wants to see in infrastructure investment. So I think it's valuable, either if the town doesn't end up applying for a TIF district or not, it gives us an opportunity to take a look at that with someone who has expertise in modeling these things.
So it's only 35,000 for the study.
Right. I'm a consultant.
Mentioned impact fees. We already have impact fees. You have more than we have. And should we be increasing what we have for impact fees?
So we use the impact fees primarily for the design phase. So in order to hire the consultants to design the park, or when we had federal funds for Market Street, we may have used the impact fees initially as a match for the federal funds before bringing in the TIF. And then it was because those projects were already in the impact fee ordinance, and those fees had been collected for those projects. It just happened that we also got a federal grant and that we also got the TIF district. So then we were able to use them for those projects.
Other questions?
My question is really about like the involvement of developers and kind of the landowners within the TIF district. At like what point did you bring them in to really consult with them and say like if we do this, will you like would you be more inclined to do that? I mean, were you and for our town specifically, I guess Eric or Matt, if we did do this, would the consultants work with developers at that stage, kind of at the viability stage, to really see if, we could kind of come up with numbers that would make this reasonable for our town?
I can answer that second part first. That would be part of the scope of work. It's part of kind of identifying what the priority projects are, identifying the potential parcels, and then trying to calculate the potential increment generated based on the infrastructure investment initially. So the town would have to decide based on those projects how it would prioritize what it wanted to do based on what it could repay. And the consultant's expertise would help us model that out as a risk assessment for the select board.
For South Burlington, how involved were the developers in each part of this?
So I would say we were an unusual case, or we're a different case than some of the other communities in Vermont. We obtained our TIF district at the nth hour, at a time when they were restricted by the state. And so we had to go to the legislature and ask for the TIF district. We also had projects that were underway. So we had Market Street that had been in development, and that we had a lot of money for that project and we wanted to finish it. And we knew that we were not going to have enough money and would need some of the TIF district financing to fund it. So I think every community has to figure out for itself what the relationship with the private sector will be. In our case, while we brought the private sector in frequently and often, I would not say that we were in a position to bind anyone to an agreement that would result in like a guaranteed revenue stream. So, whereas I think that if you look at other communities, they may have those agreements in place. And I would say part of that is the timing of our district. So,
Did anybody else have comment or insight on the question?
Nothing to add to that. No, thanks.
I'll just say that as a local gauge of activity and interest, we're talking with the development community, the landowner community every day about concepts they have or things they might be interested in doing as infrastructure comes online. And then, we just look at our record of what we're seeing for permitting. So, we're about not quite a year and a half into the adoption of the form-based code, and we've had several projects permitted or about to be permitted, and one underway under that code where we know there's interest that has arisen in Williston as a result of Williston adjusting its development standards and making things work a little better. So we would look to continue that conversation with that community and say, okay, as these other things fall into place, what does that look like for you?
But this would kind of change that relationship, right? Because it would be like what we do now is we it's probably oversimplified, but we help develop people who want to develop to get through the process. Have the ability to maybe put a break on it here or there. But this would be actually changing it so that if we didn't have the development, then we owe money that we're going to have to take out of the taxpayers' pockets from everybody else's property tax or a bigger allocation of the sales tax or whatever. And that seems to be a different business relationship. And I'm not saying it's bad. I just different.
within the law.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
It doesn't change any of the regulations or
Yeah.
the enforcement of the regulations.
yeah, I'm not anticipating that Williston is going to be the next EB5 Newport
Right.
situation.
Yeah,
It won't be me.
Yeah, I think you're always, I mean, I know our TIF district is very oriented towards the community vision. So that's something, and I think that's one of the reasons that the community has been willing to take on the risk is because it is realizing a long-held community vision. And so that's been a big part of it.
Other questions or comments for folks?
Does the town have the current skill level and time involved to be doing the federal grants?
No way, we'd have to hire somebody.
Excuse me?
I said, there's no way, we'd have to hire somebody. Sorry, Eric, I can't really answer with any facts at all, but I know this is complicated and
Yeah, I think, the reason for bringing the consultant to the analysis is we don't have the expertise on staff to do this analysis. We don't have a lot on staff. But I think if the town moves forward with this and decides to apply for a district, is granted a district, and really wants to, it's not partially going into it, it's jumping into it with
Right.
both feet. So you need the right capacity in-house to make sure it can be managed, seeing what Shirley's capacity is on the finance side, and it's a lot of project management and oversight as well. So we'd need to look at what we would need to support it operationally.
managing
I
federal
don't have a
grants is
good
a
sense of
nightmare.
what that looks like.
I will say from the Regional Planning Commission side, we will do a weekend to support the town. And, just as you saw, I think, 8 or 9 different grants that we provided to help move South Burlington along. And, and we've done that with other communities as well. So happy to support that. And I think big picture, I can't get away from our housing market and just how broken it is right now. And I say that in a positive way for you, because there is so much demand for housing in our area that is not being met, that if you can at all help to do things in building up your community to help meet that demand, the demand is there. And it's thousands of units that we are short in Chittenden County. So that's my way of encouraging you. And I mean, we're watching Burlington is, they did Cambria and Rise, and they're doing their project in the old mall space, right? Those units are getting sucked up so fast. Even the ones in your city center. They're already occupied or, pre-leased. So just, I think you're at a point in time in just our kind of the history of real estate in Vermont where I think maybe the downside risk is not great. Just my personal opinion.
Somebody applied for a TIF district and then basically isn't doing it. Is that?
There have been a few towns that have, started one. Colchester started one, I think, in 2010 and then closed it down in 2014. So there's been 2 or 3 that have started and not gone through with it.
Just capacity, you think, or?
Or sometimes it may have been what was going on at the time. That it didn't continue to make sense, in terms of the public investment versus what was going to happen on the private side. So, and I guess the one thing to take away from that is to know, you dive in, but it doesn't mean you're, falling down
first
into
pond.
it. You can stop at some point, right?
Yeah, Montpelier had a
That's right.
one of-
rather significant project defeated in the zoning and permitting process.
Oh, interesting.
Right, and without the garage, it didn't make sense to advance the hotel and garage. It didn't make sense to advance the rest of the TIF project.
Oh, interesting. Thanks.
Important question is, can we get the wastewater allocation?
Good point.
So we know what we hold today, and it's all part of the big picture here as well. So.
I just wanted to add to what everyone else had said about just the overall management is that we did have our 10-year audit last year. And we were told we had the cleanest TIF audit, so it's possible. It was basically like, thank you for the audit. And that was it. We paid a lot for it. And it was a very intensive experience and it was terrifying. But it was because you don't know what will happen and you've heard so many stories. But it was a very smooth process. And a lot of that was that we had a lot of consistency in management throughout. And There was a lot of cross-checking between finance and myself and other people that were managing projects, so that when they asked for things, we were able to provide them. And we had found mistakes early in our process and were able to ensure that all of the numbers worked by the time the auditor got there. And when I say worked, we understood and were able to pay everything correctly. And the other thing about federal grants is that VTrans has a great assistance section, and so they do most of the work.
Oh, that's nice.
It's still a federal grant, and there's still a lot to pay attention to, but they guide you through that process.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, all of you.
Yeah.
See you.
Best wishes.
Very, very informative. Thanks for your time. We do have about 50 minutes of business left if you guys want to stay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
60, only 50.
I was gonna say 53 or. Next on the agenda is zoning bylaw amendment overview. Matt, you're still up?
I'm still here.
So, I'll just ask you to take it away.
Great. So the purpose of the memo in your packet and of our conversation tonight is to review some proposed changes to Williston's Unified Development Bylaw. They're currently under consideration by the Planning Commission, who is holding their public hearing on these tonight. And so I wanted to review them sort of in two chunks, a change to the official map and then everything else. But really briefly, the change to the official map is in response to a request to do so from the majority landowner in this area, Vermont State University. And the everything else is Williston's response to changes in requirements for what zoning must do or limitations on what zoning in Vermont can do that came out of the adoption of the Home Act in June of 2023 by the legislature and signed into law by the governor. So that's my very brief introduction. We are holding these as two separate hearing items in the Planning Commission because one is simple and the other has quite a bit more stuff in it. And we wanted to keep them separate, but it's likely that both will be transmitted to the Select Board from the Planning Commission after tonight. And the next step for the Select Board would be to direct staff to warn a public hearing so that you all can consider them in that step of adoption. That's the beginning.
Okay.
And I'll talk about the map. So as I said, the first proposed amendment is an amendment to the town's official map and other maps that identify future streets on the VTSU campus. As part of the form-based code project, Williston also considered and adopted an official map which documents all of the existing streets in Taft Corners and throughout the town, as well as desired future streets in Taft Corners. And generally, where a future street was added to the map, it was in consideration of things like existing constraints, potential future development plans, and the idea of maintaining a network of walkable blocks that were of a certain dimension, generally no more than 300 or 400 feet on a side. And the consultant that helped us do this work reached out to, at the time, Vermont Technical College and said, well, what about this campus? What should we do here? And they had a conversation about what might the future of Vermont Technical College look like. And the conclusion of that was, well, let's reimagine this as a more traditional college campus. Let's put a big entry boulevard coming off of Paul Street into the interior of the campus. Let's imagine the whole campus being redeveloped with sort of a grand entry and a quad and buildings, et cetera. And those streets, what we call phase 2 streets, meaning they're not required to be constructed unless the whole site is reworked, were put onto the map and adopted into law in October of 2022. So fast forward to the last few months, and we've had some changes. Vermont Technical College is now a component of Vermont State University. Vermont State University is engaged in comprehensive planning across all of their campuses and programs in the state. And their representatives reached out to us and said, you know, as we manage this property, both retaining some of it, possibly disposing or reusing some of it, reconfiguring it, these roads don't really work for us, these future roads. They present an impediment to us being able to decide what we want to do with the property. Would you consider taking them off the map? So we discussed this with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission was generally supportive of that. And a few of the reasons for that are, number one, these were always sort of a dream. They weren't based on any solid plans that VTC or the town necessarily had for the area. They were based on some general principles we had in adopting the form-based code. They are also running across property that is an educational facility that also happens to be owned and operated by a government entity, which means that the owner here enjoys a partial but very significant exemption from local zoning, which is where this map and these streets come from. They don't have the same effect in terms of requiring a landowner to build around them or follow them that they would if they were on privately held land. So in our conversation with VTSU, they said, well, we know we have those exemptions, but just the same, we'd feel more able to plan for this campus if they were simply removed under an amendment. So that's the proposal. Hopefully, if you print it in color, you can see them. If you did like me and print it in black and white, it's hard to see what goes away, but it kind of makes a T through the middle of the circle. And should VTSU or some future agency want to come back in and master plan this and create more development potential by laying out a different pattern of streets here, they certainly could. The Planning Commission and Select Board could certainly consider that. But until such time, this amendment would give VTSU a clean slate to do their campus planning here.
I was with you until the last sentence. So if they did decide to just knock down the building that's there and develop a different campus, especially within their little circle there, would they have to come back to the town to ask for permission for the street layout?
They might, or they might want to work with us to do it. There's two things. One is because of that exemption, they might not functionally have to. The other thing is our form-based code actually creates a whole category of development that doesn't have to meet the same standards as the rest of it, called civic building. Because oftentimes civic buildings like college buildings or libraries or police stations or town halls are special. And they might be set back from the street, or they might be arranged on the site in a different way, or they might have a big walkway leading up to them instead of, being right up on the sidewalk. So our adopted code, in addition to the owners having an exemption from our code, our adopted code actually anticipates that civic buildings might get laid out differently. So depending on what someone wants to do here, they might or might not need or want to come back to the town to rearrange things there. But there's certainly an openness on the part of the Planning Commission to, consider that and work with the university if they so desire.
Other questions on this portion?
So I'll just mention that this is under an active hearing at the Planning Commission right now. I've actually asked them to keep that hearing open until I run back over there when I'm done here. So if there was any input you had that you wanted me to give them, they could actually consider it in their transmittal draft. Might not be so important for that one as the next, but let's dive into the Home Act amendments. So Act 47, known as the Home Act, generally a piece of legislation designed to increase the supply of housing in Vermont and make it easier for new homes in Vermont to be built. And it had a lot of different and fairly wide-ranging and significant impacts to the authority that Vermont communities have over how they can limit new residential development in their zoning. So in my memo, the bullet list there summarizes the big ones and the ones we needed to be responsive to in our bylaw amendment. And I should just mention up front, I think I did it later in the memo, the law says municipalities shall amend their bylaws to do the following. And most of this became effective on July 1, meaning that we have to operate as if these things are in place already. And in fact, we've had some proposals where we've had to do that already. So this is really the state saying, okay, towns, catch up to us, you got to change your rules. So briefly, we have new limitations on how much parking can be required for residential projects. You cannot require more than one parking space per residential unit, except where there's not nearby municipal parking, where you cannot require more than 1.5 spaces per unit. We were about at functionally 1.6 spaces per unit in most of our residential zones already. We've made an adjustment in the draft to 1.5. We do not think we really have anywhere right now that counts as being proximate to municipal parking where you would go down to one. Our municipal parking where it exists is either here in the village or it's street parking, which is severely limited in its usability during the winter months. You can't park there overnight for 6 months out of the year. Doesn't make sense in my mind to count that. Dwelling types. Up to a fourplex dwelling type must be allowed wherever land is zoned for residential use and water and sewer is provided. And it must be allowed using the same dimensional requirements, meaning setbacks and lot sizes as a single unit dwelling. So really briefly, in the residential zoning district, here in the village, and in all of our mixed use districts in Taft Corners, we've always allowed a fourplex as a dwelling type. The only place where we limit the dwelling type is actually out in the ag rural, where 1 and 2 family homes, single family homes and duplexes are the only allowed dwelling types. So what this change says is if you allow residential use and you provide water and sewer, you've got to allow at least a fourplex. So we've gone through all of our residential zones to make sure that they say that, to make sure there aren't any special setbacks or dimensional requirements or minimum lot size requirements that would preclude somebody from doing that. And I will mention north of Mountain View Road and 2A from Hurricane Lane up toward Walker Hill, there are a handful of small residential parcels that are in the ag rural zoning district, but are served by water and sewer, where that fourplex provision would apply. In our edits to the bylaw, we've basically just quoted this language and said, if there's water and sewer and residential is allowed, you can build a fourplex, same dimensional requirements. Residential density, municipalities must allow at least 5 units per acre in areas served by water and sewer. So by contrast, here in the village, our default is 2 units per acre. In the residential zoning district that surrounds it, we allow 3, but we already allow up to 5 for projects that have a significant portion of affordable housing. Now, everywhere that is zoned residential and has water and sewer, you must allow 5 units per acre. Everywhere else in town that's zoned residential is Taft Corners or Gateway. We were already allowing at least 5 per acre, so we were okay there. Further, there are residential density bonuses. So for a affordable housing project, municipalities must allow a 40% residential density bonus. So
What does that mean?
so if you have to allow 5, if they do an affordable housing project, you have to allow 7.
Wow.
An affordable housing project, I got to put my one footnote in the memo, makes it look very official. This is a little different than the way we see affordable for our inclusionary zoning. It's a state law definition. And the biggest difference here is it's 20% of the dwellings, not the 10 or 15 we require in inclusionary zoning. And the income limit is different if you're doing rental versus ownership. So if you're building rental to be affordable, you've got to be affordable to households making no more than 80% of the area median income. But if you're building for ownership, they need to be affordable to households making no more than 120% of the area median income. Ownership homes are allowed to be more expensive, essentially, in this definition. So we now need to cite to that definition. And what we've essentially done in the bylaw edit is replaced any density bonuses that we had for affordable housing with the ones that the state requires. Generally, these are a little bit better bonuses for a little bit smaller percentages than we had. So we were doing a 30% bonus to go for, or a 30% affordability limit, of affordability percentage, 30% affordable units to go from 3 to 5 in the RZD. So now you can do 20% of your units affordable to go from 5 to 7 in the RZD. Why? Because the legislature said we have to. And that's where we've set that.
I just don't mean to get in the weeds, but when we talk about acreage, is that buildable land or all land?
The advice we've gotten, because it's not stated explicitly in the law, is municipalities may continue to calculate density using the method they have. So in Williston, we take out wetlands, we take out wetland buffers, and we take out certain steep slopes. And then the acres that are left are the buildable acres, and that's where your dwelling yield comes from. As far as we understand it, we are still allowed to do that. This draft leaves all of that in place.
Great, thank you.
There's also a residential height bonus. Municipalities must allow one additional habitable floor above the maximum allowed building height for affordable housing projects. I will come back to that picture on the next page, and we can talk about that. And as I said, zoning bylaw amendments, we are required to make these amendments in order to comply with the law. So those are things that became effective. We are operating already in our development review as if they have been made part of our bylaw, again, because we have to. This is essentially catch up and clean up. There are some things that kind of come along with this, and that's the next section of my memo. In order to make it easier and more clear to administer all of this within our bylaw, it helps if we start using the same terminology as the state. So one recommendation we have that is in your draft is we are getting rid of the infamous dwelling unit equivalent and returning to dwelling as a basis for calculating all density, all allowed units per acre. Anybody who's in growth management would go back to dwelling. And so what this means is whether you're building a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or more, each of those will simply be called a dwelling. The staff would really like this to be part of it. It makes it a lot easier to administer and calculate on our growth management and our density bonuses and affordability requirements. And it aligns us with the way the state talks about residential density and what we are and aren't allowed to do. So reduces complexity. A dwelling's a dwelling's a dwelling.
Would we keep the DUE for sewer?
Sewer happens on a bedroom basis. So when somebody goes to purchase their sewer allocation,
Yeah.
they have to buy enough to support the bedrooms in the unit they're building. For growth management, instead of a studio being a half dwelling unit and there's so many available, it's just a whole dwelling.
Wow.
So it in some perspectives, it reduces the number of units available in the growth management system, depending on what someone's building.
Right.
That, if anything, would serve as an incentive for them to go into our inclusionary zoning pathway instead. That's what we think would happen with that. So everywhere we use dwelling unit equivalent goes away. And then in Taft Corners, the proposal is to not have a zoning district underneath the form-based code and then the form-based code, because we have density standards discussed in both, among other development standards, but rather just to make the form-based code a zoning district. This takes the overlay, makes it a district on the map. Of all the district it overlays the business park district entirely, which is Blair Park, so that district just goes away. Functionally, all of the development standards for this area live in the form-based code or other chapters of the bylaw. They don't live in the zoning chapters anymore anyway. So again, just makes it easier to administer and track all these other things that have to happen because of state law. There are two things that I called out that are in the underlying zoning that would need to be carried up into the form-based code to make this as little of a change as possible from what's happening out there right now. And those are to add 2 prohibited uses to the use table in the form-based code, and that's gas stations and retail cannabis. Retail cannabis, the select board voted some years ago to prohibit that in the Taft Corners zoning district, the business park zoning district, and the mixed use residential district, which is most of what the form-based code overlays. There's a little tiny bit of mixed-use commercial that rides along with that, but it would just be to say, right now, that prohibition lives in the underlying district. It's not discussed in form-based code. It would need to be brought up. And the prohibition is much older, but it's the same structure when it comes to gas stations. So retail fuel has not been allowed in the Taft Corners Growth Center for, well, since Simon's Plaza was built. It was actually not allowed at the time Simon's Plaza was built, but not in a affirmative enough way for a judge to agree that it wasn't allowed, which is why Simon's Plaza exists. So it would carry that prohibition forward. Not because we really want to prohibit those things, but because they're prohibited in the underlying zoning that would be replaced entirely by turning the overlay district into a zoning district.
So that means that Friendly's, where Friendly's was, that got, resold, that would be prohibited to put another gas station there.
Today, it's prohibited because it's in the Taft Corners zoning district, which prohibits them. If this were adopted, it would be prohibited because even though the Taft Corners district went away, the prohibition carried forward to the form-based code district. And then last page, talking about building height. So the extra floor for an affordable housing project applies in all zoning districts. Everywhere you have a height limit, you need to allow an extra floor on top of that for these state-defined affordable housing projects. And in most parts of town, in fact, even in most sort of sub areas of the form-based code, that's more height, but it's nothing the town doesn't allow, at least somewhere. In most of the town, like here in the RZD or the village, we have a 36-foot height limit. If somebody wanted to go to 48 for one of these projects, they could. We talked about, should we be adjusting heights everywhere for this? The Planning Commission felt no, but the maximum height in the form-based code area was the number one most challenging and controversial aspect of the entire code. The town of Williston worked really hard to come up with 6 stories and an 87-foot height limit. And a year later, the legislature came and slapped another story on top of that. Across the entire state, I am sure that provision adds meaningful amounts of housing potential to lots and lots of communities. But in Williston, what it did result in is this building I have the picture of. This is 6 stories. It actually is less than 87 feet. It still is under the town's absolute limit. And it's 6 stories with a flat roof, where normally a flat roof building would only be allowed at 5 stories. And that would be the maximum height of a flat roof building. So folks who are around for form-based code might remember the way all of our heights work is there's a flat roof limit. If you want to put a pitched roof on top of that flat roof limit, you can use it for occupiable space. We call that an attic story. So what was settled on was 5 stories flat with a 6th attic story. All of that went up by a story because of the passage of the Home Act. So what the Planning Commission is proposing would be in that tallest district that was adopted at 5 and 6, but is now effectively 6 and 7 due to the Home Act, we drop down a story to 4 and 5. In other words, the maximum height that the Select Board adopted in October 2022 would only be accessible to affordable housing projects instead of all projects, but there wouldn't be anything 7 stories tall and there wouldn't be anything 6 stories with a flat roof. If this bylaw changes, it will not affect the project I have the picture of here.
That was my question. Did you read that?
They are vested in the version of the laws that were in place at the time they submitted a complete application. And I've actually, at the end of last week, issued a zoning approval for this based on those rules. But I think, and the Planning Commission thinks, that it makes sense to keep the absolute tallest height limit where it was, let the affordability be the bonus that gets you to the absolute tallest, but does not take you over it. So that's the last edit, would be to dial back that tallest height. So the tallest possible thing would be within the limits adopted by the board in 2022. So bit of a whirlwind tour. If anybody actually ventured into the hearing draft, you probably saw that it was 306 pages long.
I only
Apologies.
got to 209. Ran out of time.
It touches a lot of pages of the bylaw, but generally in small ways. It's just that those discussions of things like zoning, densities, and allowed unit types are all throughout the document. So we had to make a really a global run through it to make all the changes that were needed. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Footnote question, just for fun. Actually, it's not just for fun. I'm really curious. This affordable housing definition that the Vermont law, does this match our inclusionary zoning definition of affordable?
It does not.
Okay, I remember, that's just, what is it, 100% of the average?
So it doesn't match it in two ways. The amount of units that are required to be affordable in for us is either 10 or 15%. This is 20.
Yep.
And then the affordability limits are different. So to be inclusionary in Williston under our bylaws, you either need to do 10% of your units affordable at 80% area median income, or 15% of your units affordable at 100% of the area median income. And we do not distinguish between whether those units are intended for ownership or rental. In the state's rule, it's always 20% of the units, but if they're rentals, they need to be more limited in their cost than if they are for sale. If they're for sale, you can sell them for more. If they're for rent, you can rent them. You must rent them for less.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Since we haven't actually received any the recommendations from the committee, we can't really set a date or request a public hearing on these, can we, tonight?
I think you can. However, if you were to get something from the Planning Commission that didn't look like this, you would then want to push it off. There's a bit of a sense of, I won't say urgency, but desire for timeliness, particularly on the part of VTSU with the map. So we were looking for direction as staff as to whether we could, start taking a look at when we could advertise a hearing for, assuming what would come over from the Planning Commission would be doable. The legal requirement is that you must not hold your hearing less than 15 days following the submittal of the draft to you by the Planning Commission. So they need to give it to you somehow, and the hearing can't happen for at least 2 weeks after that, because that's the warning period for the select board.
Matt and I chatted about that today. Just think how they're having their hearing at 7 o'clock. Select board is hearing us around 8 o'clock. Do we have a sequencing issue? And we felt, should the board want to direct staff to warn a public hearing, and could add something to the motion upon receipt of the Planning Commission's transmittal, just so that's clean.
Yes.
I mean, if I walk over there and they tell me they're all set, if you're all set, I'll come back and tell you they're all set with the draft as written. I'm happy to communicate that.
So yeah, just for my clarification, I'm a little slow sometimes. The state sets the minimum affordable housing, and the town is requiring housing to be more affordable than what the state is dictating.
We are. So that state definition in the law doesn't say everybody in Vermont has to use this definition. It says for certain purposes, we, the state of Vermont, use this definition. The state, that definition existed before this law. The state was using it in relation to the way certain projects were reviewed under Act 250. So when the legislature wrote this, they just pointed at this existing definition and said that's going to be the threshold for towns to be required to give this density bonus. So they're different. They're allowed to be different. It makes our life a little more challenging. But as it goes, I like where Williston landed on its requirements, and I wouldn't recommend changing its requirements for its inclusionary zoning path, given that they are a little bit tighter than what the state uses for its definition.
I agree.
Yeah, and there's no requirement that we change that coming out of this law. We just have to use their definition for granting the density bonus or the height bonus.
And the height bonus or the height restriction includes the pitched roof, correct?
The absolute 87-foot limit includes everything, yes.
Yeah, I heard a lot about the building heights myself.
Yeah.
That's a big touchy, it's an issue.
Yeah.
It's gonna restrict your barn height, though. 87 feet barn.
Shots.
Maybe if we put it on end, I don't
What
know.
about the cupola?
I think it's got a pitched roof here.
Other questions?
Were there any big discussions at the planning commission about any of these? I mean, they kind of make sense to me. I just don't know what.
Yeah, not big, but we in the initial draft, I floated the idea of taking all of the different sub areas of form-based code and dropping all of them by a story.
Right.
You know, did you just want to lower everything? And the planning commission looked at that and said, well, you know, in some places that drops the maximum from 3 down to 2, which feels like not very much. And the only place where it's necessary to really stay under that 87-foot height limit is in what we call the town center and shop frontages, which are the tallest ones.
Right.
I think the commission also wanted to strike a balance between, you know, being supportive of the creation of housing and being concerned about building height.
Right.
So this felt like the right balance to them to just go after the tall one.
Other questions? No, there are proposed motions and perhaps they need to be edited.
Let me try with that. I move to schedule a public hearing on proposed amendments to the town official map, subject to receipt of the amendment from the planning commission, and further to move to schedule a public hearing on proposed amendments to the Williston Unified Development Bylaw for compliance with the 2023 Home Act, subject to receipt of the amendments from the planning commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Energy efficiency and conservation block grant options. Linda, thank you for coming forward.
Thank you for having me.
Jump right in.
Okay. So Williston is one of 10 Vermont municipalities that is going to receive $75,000 in formula funding from the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. And so the memo that you have is just proposing a recommendation for using this grant funding in combination with other leveraged funds, including some town ARPA funding. So the Department of Energy provided an alternative to a traditional grant process, which is like a new voucher program. And so they have this program where you can apply for a voucher to purchase equipment or technical assistance from the Department of Energy. This option is much more streamlined than a traditional grant, but the trade-off is that there's very strict limitations as to what you can do with a voucher without triggering the more onerous federal requirements like Davis-Bacon or NEPA regulations. So in coming up with these recommendations, we're really thinking about what's going to be easy for the town to do and will still achieve some of the town's goals related to energy. I consulted with the Energy Committee, Department of Public Works, Recreation Department, and town manager in coming up with these recommendations. And so we're recommending that this grant be used to purchase 2 new electric mowers, ride-on mowers, one for DPW and one for recreation and parks, and an electric fleet vehicle that could be used across departments instead of people using their own personal vehicles and getting reimbursed. So this proposed use of the EECBG funding would meet a lot of the town's goals it would start the process of transitioning the town's fleet to electric by providing a couple of demonstrations of electric vehicle technology, including the mowers, and if an EV was purchased, it would be a way for town departments and town staff to drive it around, test it out, become familiar with it, and might be able to convince other departments to transition to EVs as replacements for their gas-powered vehicles. It also provides a highly visible demonstration of electric lawn care and grounds equipment for the town. So, just a lot of people use the rec fields, and, if they see these electric mowers around, that basically is the town leading by example, and, which will maybe get other folks curious about electric powered equipment. It will reduce life cycle costs for the mowers. It'll reduce annual fuel consumption. It will reduce carbon emissions. It will save some money on mileage reimbursements, although the amount that you'll see in that footnote, the amount that's listed is not right. I was looking under the wrong column, and that's actually the amount that was budgeted for FY24. So it's more along the lines of a little over $2,000 that was spent for mileage in FY23. But the operational costs of electric vehicles are a lot less than 52 cents per mile. And from what I've heard, the reimbursement rate is going up to 67 cents per mile. So anyway, we are requesting the select board to consider allocating up to $25,000 from ARPA funding to cover the town's portion of funding for this project. There's other leveraged sources of funding, including Green Mountain Power rebates, and possibly a grant from the Vermont Electrifier Fleet Grant Program, which we haven't applied to yet, but we will if the select board agrees with these proposed expenditure, this use of the grant. And then there's also a probable federal tax credit through the federal clean vehicle tax credit, which municipalities can benefit from now through a direct pay option. There will be a little bit of sort of untangling that to kind of make sure that it's done properly, et cetera. So, I just want to mention that, some neighboring municipalities have taken steps to electrify their fleets. Burlington now has 35 electric vehicles, and the town also had some analysis done by through the Department of Energy's Clean Energy to Communities program that demonstrated that that if the town did transition light duty pickup trucks to electric vehicles, that the greenhouse gas emissions could decrease by as much as 76%. The total cost of ownership would be comparable or decrease slightly. So this, we're recommending that the grant be used this way because it does further the town's energy goals, namely increasing the share of light-duty electric vehicles registered in Williston and replacing the town's light-duty vehicles with EVs as the individual vehicles are due for replacement. So this grant really provides a great opportunity for the town to lead by example and start to transition the town's fleet to electric. And I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any questions.
Questions from the board?
I love the mowers. I'm kind of bumping on investing in a car that we don't have now and will get 4,000 miles a year usage. I don't think that's a great let's just say this, is there a reason that we didn't choose to replace a light duty truck instead? I want the electric vehicle, I'm just not sure I want to add a underutilized car to the fleet.
Right.
Makes sense.
I think the reason has been a hesitancy of the town departments to, have an electric pickup truck. I mean, frankly, that would be my preference, that it, be, replace one of the current gas pickup trucks. But, there is definitely hesitancy to kind of make that commitment.
We've looked into it the last couple of capital cycles, and we've run into a supply issue as well and a state contract issue on some of these vehicles. I think we looked at it, one of them for the command vehicle for the fire department. And we don't have enough kind of real world information on operationally how that would look, as these vehicles could be at a fire scene for several hours. The charge went out, what that looks like to recharge in a real time. So we need some more feedback from other departments before making that investment.
Well, I totally get it on emergency vehicles that would be a bit of a stretch. I probably wouldn't want to be reliant on someone remember to plug in the ambulance if I had a heart attack. But I would think that Public Works or somebody, I mean, you got to start somewhere. And I don't think starting with a Chevy Bolt is going to move anybody forward on trusting electric vehicles for a truck. I just can't see it. It seems like it'd be like saying your mower works, therefore you're going to buy a light duty truck. I mean, these guys are not going to be driving that Bolt, very often. So
we've tried to get them the last year, and then it's just been a supply issue as well.
And the cost issue, the cost.
Yeah.
yeah, they're more expensive, but yeah. But here but that's why you get a grant.
Yeah, true that if we were to purchase a pickup truck, that would kind of increase the portion of the town's expense, because the grant wouldn't, you have about $40,000 left after the mowers. So.
I don't remember what our next pickup truck.
They get away there.
I agree with Gene. It makes more sense to replace a vehicle than to add another vehicle to the fleet, just because we have the money to add a vehicle to the fleet.
Could we add one and sell one? Sell a used vehicle?
I don't think we have a used vehicle that's not in the fire department, the police department, or the public works department.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't a sedan sitting around right now. That's kind of the problem. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking, Ted, is we'd be very excited about this if we could, even if we sold one that's not, it's a year or two ahead of when we would sell it. That's all well and good for me. We could still.
Yeah, me too. I will say that the hesitancy on electric vehicles, I mean, I was forced into buying one by my family. And as is often the case in my family. But I'm just, my vehicle has a 300-mile capacity on it, and maybe it's, subtract some miles in the cold weather. But I'm just tooling around Chittenden County, or, I go up to Lamoille County quite a bit for my job. St. Johnsbury on occasion. I've never had an issue with.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with mine either.
Yeah.
Now that I can plug it in. But I did, when the power was out,
Yeah.
had to get in lines at Hannaford's to plug my car in. So that was. No, I'm totally with you. I don't see any reason why a non-emergency vehicle wouldn't work.
I would even consider it an emergency vehicle, frankly. I mean, I don't know how many times a car goes, a truck or a car goes 300 miles without having a chance to stop for an hour.
They have to, but don't emergency vehicles have to, the police cruisers have to keep running, right? So even if they're not driving, they have to be running still.
Yeah, and powering the computers and things like that.
Yeah, I sat outside last meeting for an hour.
Yeah.
Some vehicles running
Yeah.
the whole time.
Could we?
Sorry. I interrupt you, Jane. My question actually was about the mowers. I support fully having the electric mowers. I'm glad we're going to do that. I can't recall if in the budget this was kind of an item we had planned for. Obviously, we have, maintenance and capital expenses put towards those things already. So are we replacing, or would we be selling some of the gas-powered mowers then? Then we would recoup some of that cost there too, or would we be keeping those gas-powered mowers in the fleet? I just, again, I can't remember if this is in the budget somewhere or, how this was handled.
Yep, good question. This would be expanding the fleet by the 2 mowers, and as we spoke with Parks and Public Works, there's a need for additional mower capacity moving forward. For example, Allenbrook Park, as we build that out, we'll need a mower for that park, and it gives the department the ability to really test out these electric mowers, so when it's time to replace the gas-powered ones, we can look at moving those to electric as well.
So there's no formal action, but we are being asked for our consensus or our input on the suggested use of the grant funds. It sounds like the mowers are not controversial. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
So I didn't know we were adding to the fleet, but I'll let them have it.
I'm sorry, what?
I thought we were replacing at least one. I didn't know we were going to 4 mowers. Are they going to come back and ask for 4 groundspeople?
No.
Okay.
We will say no.
So I have a question then about policy, about town policy then, about mileage reimbursement and so forth then. I know that, like, for instance, the state, if you have to go travel beyond X amount of distance, and there's a fleet vehicle, like, available, you're supposed to take that over taking your own personal vehicle and getting mileage reimbursement. If we did get this town like fleet vehicle, could we make it policy that people needed to utilize that before utilizing their own personal vehicle?
Yep, we certainly could. And another town I worked in, we had just system-wise, people would sign it out from the town manager's office, but that would be my intent. We have this fleet vehicle, we want it to be used, and we have some people that attend training or conferences. Obviously, there's a conflict on the same day. Everyone can't take the vehicle, but that would be my preference. If we invest in it, we want it to be used quite a bit.
Yeah, I still have to say that, $2,000 is 4,000 miles, and it's mostly finance and planning and zoning. So I don't see that as a way to get more light duty trucks or emergency vehicles to be used. So, could we just ask that you go push a little bit harder on the truck? We're not going to make a decision tonight anyway. I would say I'm probably not in favor of it if it's a new vehicle that's going to get a couple thousand miles a year usage.
I'll go check our capital plan and see when we have a replacement up next. We just, recreation truck came in. That was an insurance claim for that one. So I just need to look and see when that and the DPW trucks are up for replacement. We can check in and see kind of what the pricing and see the other item was the state contract.
Last week.
So,
We replaced a public works truck last week.
That was we'd ordered that a while ago.
We did, yes.
It's taken a long time to get vehicles right now for any type of vehicle. I remember, Melinda, the state contract hasn't really covered a lot of EVs at this point.
they have hardly anything.
Well, you just go out to bid.
Does
Yeah.
battery-powered tools fall under that block grant?
Yes, so,
Any battery-powered tool, like a weed whacker?
right. Yeah, that was also considered, and,
Those come and go pretty quickly. They don't last long.
yeah, I mean, you could, I was trying to kind of come up with the combination that would use every last cent, not leave anything on the table. If you took out the EV and instead, there's only so many hand tools you can get, but they're at $400, $500 a pop. But you could get, 3 or 4 weed whackers. You could get, a few chainsaws. But you're not going to use up,
40 grand.
the whole grant.
What about the lighting? There's a whole bunch of lighting projects in capital.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Melinda's done a lot of work looking into that to try to see if we could make it work, and like, sure about it.
About the, of the,
LEDs?
the LEDs. Yeah, I mean, so that, yeah, that would be another possible use, but then you get into installation, which brings you into Bacon Davis territory and so forth. I mean, it's not that we couldn't do that, but it just, you know, it makes it a little more complicated. So I was trying to think of things that were easy.
I wonder if you could buy all the materials under the grant and do the installation.
They still would consider installation part of the project and subject to those grant requirements.
It's not impossible, Bacon Davis, but
No,
pain.
it's, yeah. But yeah, it was definitely a consideration.
The Energy Committee, they looked at kind of all these ideas, and this is what there was a recommendation for the board to consider first.
I agree with Gene.
So does this conversation give you enough guidance on where to go next? Or do you want us
I'll
to-
get some more information on the truck. We wanted to bring it to the board tonight because as it was modeled out here to make this draft of the project work, it would need a little bit more ARPA money. So it's kind of a precursor to that discussion to get all those ideas on the table. So what we can do before the next meeting, we'll review the capital replacement schedule for a pickup truck. We'll get an idea kind of what the pricing for those trucks are. Usually with a state contract price for vehicles, we can get, surely the price comes down $20,000-$30,000 sometimes on a vehicle versus the lot price,
But you have to wait about 3.5 years.
depending when they come in. So we're kind of, these EVs the trucks especially can be a little more expensive. You don't have that state price. So it's a policy question for the select board. You can leverage this grant to make that initial purchase for something like this too, but it might be paying a little more money for something right now. But it's a policy decision for you, how you want to prioritize that and how do you want to leverage these grant monies. And once we get the vehicle, we start saving for replacing the vehicle. So it's up to you how you want to move forward. We have a good opportunity, $75,000 from the federal government, more federal money, how we want to spend it.
When do you have to commit this money?
So we have to, even though this is formula funding, we still have to submit an application, and that has to be submitted by, I believe it's April. So,
When do you have to have it spent by?
and then I believe they give you 2 years. But I'll check on that too.
Thank you for all this. I'm still working on your lighting though. It's a problem, but I'm going to get that in somehow.
Right.
So does that give you enough?
We'll come back next meeting.
I mean, frankly, it's only $2,000 out of
Right.
ARPA, right? So we could say no on ARPA next.
25.
25.
25,000.
Oh. Oh, no, what we're looking at here? Other leveraged funds?
Go to the second page in the first paragraph.
I thought that was for the mowers. Okay.
But look at, under the chart, talks about 25,000.
We didn't want to spend that money for the police officers for the body cams.
Yeah, but the
tasers.
25,000 is for everything, right?
That was
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Essentially fills in the
and the-
gap.
Yeah.
Right.
And these other
Right.
rebates.
Right. So, but if we said, if we approved the ARPA money for the mowers, but not for the, what am I missing?
So for this, the spreadsheet on the first page,
Yeah.
the ARPA funds would go toward the mowers. The EV would largely be
Grant money.
spent from the CBG grant plus the rebate from Green Mountain Power.
So we can divide this up whatever way the board would like to proceed. The mowers, if they're about 61,000, then you could say, look at another way to spend the last 14,000, for example, or we can see what the truck looks like, and you might say rather spend all the grant on the truck, for example. Those are kind of the
So there's no limitation, like there's no matching, you have to spend this much on the grant and this much somewhere else, it's just,
No.
this is the amount of money? Okay,
We don't have to spend every dollar of it.
yes, we do.
Yeah, yeah. I have a question about the charging infrastructure, actually.
Yeah.
So the $5,000 to charging infrastructure, would that be usable by, other electric vehicles, future potential electric vehicles, or is it a specific infrastructure to, say, the Chevy Volt?
No, it would be usable by any electric vehicle. So it could be, and honestly, it's not like a thing that's like you can do without it. You could literally plug the car into a 120-volt outlet and charge it overnight that way. So this would be, it's not a must-have, but it would be it's sort of a nice-to-have. And the $5,000 was like a conservative, I mean, it's like, if they had to do a lot of pulling wires here and there and they weren't, they're not sure what it would actually take to put one in.
Can't be that expensive.
I'm sorry, did Greta ask how much would it cost for an additional charger?
It's on
Part of
the,
question?
She asked if it was a public, could it be used by other vehicles? or
By
just-
other vehicles.
How much does it cost to put a charger in? Would that,
Doesn't cost $5,000, but unless it's really complicated installation.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of, yeah, it depends where it's.
Right.
If
Yeah.
the electricity's there or not. The town moves forward with the parking lot project, we'll have the conduit there, we'll be hopefully adding more chargers over time with more parking spaces out there. So, and that'll be easy to get the electricity out of the ground.
would those chargers qualify for the block grant?
Yep, I believe so.
Yeah, but the timing is, because we have to apply for this and pretty much know what we want to do with it by April, I think that they'd need, I think that since we don't know exactly where the chargers are going in the parking lot and don't have a really detailed plan for that, I don't think it would really work for this grant.
but again, you have the direction you need.
It's
Okay.
good discussion.
If we can move on,
Good problem to
there
have.
are other items, and it's
That's right.
it's after 9:00, and if we can go on, we're
Gary's opinion.
Thank you.
we're 15 minutes behind at least. The next item, VTrans mileage certificate. Eric, can you walk us through that?
This one should be easy.
Yep. Every year, the town needs to adopt the mileage certificate to reflect its current mileage. The state based its award formula based on that mileage. There have been no changes in the last year. Motion is suggested at 4. So,
Okay.
I move to approve the 2024 certificate of highway mileage.
Is there a second?
Second,
Further discussion?
God, no.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Passing around. Next, Board of Civil Authority appointment.
so this is there's an email from the Williston Republican Party Chair Cindy Roy requesting the appointment of Peggy Widmere to the BCA for only election-related functions. There's currently no members of the Republican Party on the BCA. I consulted with Town Clerk Sarah Mason. Under state law, if the BCA does not contain at least 3 members from each major political party, then the party may submit a written request to the legislative body of the municipality for members of the party to be appointed to address the underrepresentation for election-related functions. Statute then states the select board shall appoint the person or persons submitted by the underrepresented political party to bring its representation on the Board of Civil Authority to 3. The Republican Party has put forward 1 name so far. They could request an additional 2 names if they choose, but they put together 1 right now. There's a appointment motion for the board to consider.
Questions for Eric?
We've done this twice in the recent past, so it's a good thing to do.
I'm just confused, the difference between the Board of Civil Authority and the Justice of the Peace. This person, when you say election only?
JPs are on the Board of Civil Authority, but they also serve on other capacities as well.
Right.
And what am I, my brain is freezing, but the Board of Abatement?
Pardon me?
Board of Abatement?
No, this person will only serve for,
Yeah, I know, but the JPs serve on other.
JPs do with the BCA, and, yes.
So would we have JP who doesn't do elections?
She's not a JP, just a member of the Board of Civil Authority.
Because I think we have a JP just of the peace open. Is there a fixed number on the Board of Civil Authority? Maybe that's what I'm getting confused on.
Yes, well, there are.
But it can change though, for this purpose.
Yeah,
I
think it's,
I had the same question.
yeah, if it's 15, I think it's 15, but if there's not this representation, it can exceed that to allow an extra, up to 3 of each major political party represented.
Okay, so I think we have a justice of the peace opening, right? Or is,
I don't know.
but,
We have,
Oh, no, we do, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
we currently have 14 JPs because we have one vacancy that's being proposed to the governor.
and so that would be a different process than this.
That's a
Correct.
whole different process.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
I'm feeling more comfortable now.
Yep, yep. And this, when I was chair of the Richmond Democratic Committee, which is a lofty position, we had a deal with the Republicans in town where each of us would nominate, there were 12 JP positions and each party would nominate 6 people. So there was always even number. And we don't do that in Williston, but it would make sense to have people from other political parties on the Board of Civil Authority.
Yep.
So there is a proposed motion.
Move to appoint Peggy Woodbuyer to the Board of Civil Authority for an unexpired term through January 31, 2025.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Nay, the ayes have it. Brings us up to manager's report.
So a whole lot to report. I did testify last Friday to House Corrections and Institutions about the former state police property on Route 2A. Had a good discussion with the committee. I think it's going to come down to a continued dialogue about our request is to have the town with the right of first refusal for the property. And I don't know if this said, last time I talked to the board about this, the state did an appraisal earlier this year and the fair market value is about $2.6 million. If the town gets this right of first refusal, the town's certainly not locked into that. We just get to have a thoughtful discussion about does the town consider exercising that right or not. Have a good discussion in the community about that. This committee's position is, I certainly understand that's a good thing to look at on the town's behalf. But they're also looking at monies to the capital fund, and they got feedback from Buildings and General Services that if they put this on the open market, they may get more than the fair market value. Seems to be a property that has a lot of interest, according to their property manager. So they'll likely have me back. They'll talk about this another month or so, next few weeks. And that'll probably be the theme of discussion. I need to chat with legislative council a bit too. Terry served on that committee for many years.
I did. And I sat in on the streaming of the committee meeting that Eric testified on. And it didn't surprise me that they were talking, because this is a whole different ballgame than we usually saw at the committee. Usually the lands are not significantly priced, so that the Department of Buildings and General Services will go out for bids for properties. They can accept any bid that's higher or lower or whatever, or reject any bid that comes in. The question was raised, well, what happens if Williston gets the first right of refusal for the property for, let's say, 2.3 million, and we buy it and they decide to sell it to somebody else and get more money for it? Does that, and the monies that are paid by whoever goes back to the capital budget for use within the capital budget, and the capital budget is set at a certain amount by the Debt Affordability Committee. So this would increase the amount of money that they would have by whatever. So that's the thing they're wrestling with right now. When I was there for the 10 years, we never had that problem.
It's not a problem, is it?
Well, it is for us.
To be continued.
Yeah.
Board update on that. And then just a question is the board anticipate executive session for next meeting with a 6:30 start time be okay for board members?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay for you, Greta?
Yeah, she said, oh yeah. Good. Greta, are we good with that?
Yep, sorry, just lagging. Yes, that's great. Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. That's all I have.
Okay, and that therefore would bring us to other business. Is there any other business?
I think it's other business, but I'm thinking about next meeting, we're going to be talking about the ARPA funds and how to spend them. And I wondered if we've done this sort of in the past, is if each of us comes up with like 5 ideas for spending ARPA funds and presents them at the next meeting, see if we have any agreement on certain ones, then we can at least know that we have something we can agree on.
Folks think about that?
Well, I thought we kind of had that list, so I thought, I mean, at one point I thought we'd all just submit it and then we could have a spreadsheet with them all lined up and you'd see which ones had the most votes and have a conversation around if that.
Well, we
made the
got,
most
that's
sense.
like a list of what, 50 or more?
Yeah, it was quite that many, but
I'm sure, but eventually we're going to get to looking at that list as well, but I wondered if we can come up with something for like 3 or 4 that we can agree upon before we get to that point. See if we have any money left after that.
I didn't think it was quite that bad when you kind of, at one point we talked about sort of grouping, like the Conservation Commission had 7 ideas, some of them were like $5,000, you know, it just like kind of group that into a Conservation Commission. We'll give you, you know, you're asking for whatever, we're gonna give you 50,000, you guys figure it out. That kind of thing, kind of, I thought, when I sent an email around, just expressing my thoughts on it. Thank you, nobody answered, so we're all within compliance. But I thought there was probably only maybe 20 that were decision points when you kind of group some of them like that, which was, but I probably had 12 on the list. I mean, it's $1 million, it's a real money.
Other thoughts on Terry's proposal? It wouldn't be enforceable like a homework assignment. Might be a good idea to give it some thought at least before the meeting.
What I'll do too is I'll update that list. We have some more conversations the last couple of months since we looked at it. For example, the culverts on Talcott Road. I just got some information. Bruce and his department had some numbers last week. That's probably a $1.7 million project from what they put together. I'll get this all in a report format for the board, and I'll add in part of this TV discussion tonight as well, and the TIF discussion. I'll get you most up-to-date materials and then let's report some conversation.
Will you pull all of the, I mean, it's not a huge deal, but will you pull all the things that we've already voted to fund through ORPA? Just, it'll clean it up a little bit and won't look quite as daunting.
Sure. Yeah, we can, Shirley has a list going, so we can update that file, and Shirley, I'll talk to Shirley too to get an updated number, because part of it was allocating ARPA in the operating budget the last couple of years, and in the FY22 operating budget, we had $300,000 that we didn't end up needing to use. So as we wrap up the FY23 numbers, I'll see where you landed. You're shaking your head, we didn't need to use it?
No.
So there's an extra 150 right there as well. So we'll update that bottom line for you.
But to Terry's point, it'd be awkward for us all to be sitting around going, what about, I mean, I don't know how to have this conversation if we don't at least have something, a starting point, so.
I'd be happy to put something together so you have something to start with if you all want to sort of rate those projects.
Yeah.
With some kind of scale, and then like you said, Gene, the ones that, I don't know, let's just say 5, and if all of you say, oh, this one's a 5, right? Kind of end the discussion.
Right.
We all agree on it.
Yeah, at least narrow it down to something.
Might help, like you said, move the conversation along.
You're not necessarily locked into making all those decisions at this meeting too, but especially for infrastructure projects, we're running against a timetable and again March 19th. So
Yeah, I mean, I would think, I would love to be able to not have to commit at all, but have some buffer in case other things ran over or something else came up, but, you know, at least get down to here, to this point, saying we should move forward with these. Are people comfortable if we take those commission or committee requests and putting them in one decision, or I just don't feel that I'm confident enough to say that the trails people need signs, but they don't need a parking lot, you know, I don't, or do we want them all separate?
No, I agree with you, Jean. I mean, obviously, I just think it, you know, then it would need to be with the understanding that whatever project that they, you know, decided to move forward with, that they determined was best use of that money, had to be spent within the same time, with, you know, the appropriate time frame.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, I don't know what the priority is there, so I agree with you.
They should still all be listed there, so we remember what they were, but that just makes it makes it a little bit shorter. Like I said, I wouldn't know how to prioritize within some of those groups.
Especially like Bruce Horare's Public Works Department.
Well, he sent something around with priorities, though.
Yeah, he did.
I'll have to go find that again, but
I looked up eligible uses for ARPA funds, you know? That's what I did. And I looked at what other towns have spent them on.
I think they're all legit. I looked at,
Some of them were a little,
I was just worried about things like the culvert, if you could spend it, commit it fast
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, yeah, the tricky part is, I mean, we probably only have a little over $1 million left, so you could say commit the rest to the culvert project. We need another
Yeah,
probably $500,000 to get that done. So
right.
it's hard to even seed it because you're going to run into a deadline to spend it. So
Right.
would it be helpful if this was at the next meeting to answer kind of infrastructure questions as you look at these, or any other department heads you don't have to tell me right now. Just
I think it's a little bit unfair to have Bruce here and not have the other committees here, so,
So no.
I mean, maybe as we go through, if we get something from Shirley so that we're trying to fill it out, we have questions, Ted could, you know, consolidate the questions and see if we can get it back, but,
I'll put everything I have into the updated packet for the board.
Okay.
yeah, maybe if you could find Bruce's memo with his explanation of priorities and send it around, attach it again, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll just refresh and send everything in.
Here, maybe we can brainstorm about sending it out to all of you and then with some kind of rating scale.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So we'll work on it.
So that would, if we're set with that, that would bring us to final thoughts on agenda items from this meeting. Are there any? Hearing,
agenda thoughts on this meeting tonight, correct?
yeah. Follow up. If there are none, we are adjourned.